not what your country can do for you, but question what you can do for your country. A rose, by any other classification, would smell just as sweet. You're probably thinking, what the heck? These aren't the words that we know. When you say question or ask, it completely changes the meaning of the quote. If you say ask what you can do for your country, you sound so open, right? But if you say question, you sound a lot more closed, more dubious. Can you actually do it? I don't know about you, but unless you're in a Hopkins lab, saying a rose by any other classification might not land you a date. But if you stuck with the original Shakespeare quote, you just might. So I'm here to talk to you about the absolute value of words. Now you might be thinking, what is that? What does that even mean, the absolute value of words? Well, here we are at Johns Hopkins, and as you can see, even Google Maps calls us the campus with the famed pre-med curriculum, right? But that's not all that we are. We have so many humanities, and those can't be overshadowed. Currently, it's so easy to think about the way that A can affect B. If there's a direct correlation between what you do and the effect you get, it seems like it's worth it. It's something that's successful, right? But when you have things like words and art, you can't always see a direct correlation. This means that we have like a reduced perceived value of words, right? But that's not true. Words do have a value, an absolute value. So when you look at these absolute value signs, what do you think of? Probably a math class, right? Now, when I say, oh, my TED Talk today is about applying mathematical constructs to the English language, doesn't that sound so fancy? But if I say, my TEDx talk today is about words, it doesn't have the same effect. So when you have the absolute value of words, there's the perceived positive and negative connotations. Let's take the words regular, average, and normal. They all seem like synonyms, right? If you looked up on thesaurus.com, like many of you I'm sure do for your essays, you would say, yeah, I could use any one of those. But that's not exactly true. So let's look at the word average. When you hear the word average, it almost sounds negative, doesn't it? Oh, he's just average. On that exam, I did average, but if you didn't do average, you would just assume that it's positive, right? Similarly, you have the word normal. When you hear the word normal, do you think of it as a positive or negative connotation? Raise your hand if you think of it as positive. Yeah, most people do. Because when you hear something's normal, it seems all right. But anything that's a deviation from normal is abnormal, and we're not cool with that, right? So it sounds negative. But then you get to regular. That has a slightly more neutral connotation, so it's more even playing ground. But if you were to use any one of those words, you'd have to be very careful to think about what your connotations are. I asked one of my writing sems professors, what word do you think is really misconstrued? And I figured, as a writing seminars professor, she was going to give me this wonderful word, right? Interesting. That's the word she chose. We have these things called workshops, and we discuss what we liked or didn't like about someone's writing. But when people hear the word interesting, they might mean it to be positive. That was a very interesting piece you had there. Or it could be negative. Oh yeah, that was interesting. So what does it really mean? It really relies on the context of the question. So I guess it's interesting to think about all of the different ways that we can use words. I have a challenge for all of you guys. So I'm sure a lot of you have played charades or the Ellen DeGeneres game Heads Up. You play all these games and you can only act things out, right? Or you have to use other words to describe it, but you can't say that exact word. What if I were to tell you that you could communicate with everybody else today using the 3 things up on the screen. How many of you think you could do that? Well, what if I were to tell you that's all you've been doing all your life? So a straight line, the dots, and then the curved lines form the alphabet. That's what you've been using to communicate with everybody else, right? What if I were to tell you, just for some mind-boggling things, that A is not the first letter, and Z is not the last? It's just the order that we put them in, right? So when you think about all these things, it makes you consider, wow, the English language is actually pretty cool, right? All of the words that we see are really just a rearrangement of 26 alphabets, at least for the English language. So the squiggles on a piece of paper, the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, which, as Abraham Lincoln said, helped start the big war. All of those were just squiggles on a piece of paper, and look at what they've done. So this equation up on the screen, when you see that, how many of you guys understand what it's saying? If you've taken a math class, maybe you can relate to this? No? Yeah, because this doesn't make sense in math, but it makes sense in English. So any of the math professors out there probably thinking you really took advantage of covered grades because that's not how things usually work. And you know what, I did, but you're probably thinking this can't make sense. Yeah, right. But that's where it is. You have 2 positive things, yeah and right. But when you put them together, they make a negative. How does that make sense? When you hear the F-bomb, it's not always a swear word. It might be something like the word feminist. These words are loaded. When is the last time you heard someone say, "Oh yeah, I'm a doctor and I look at hearts, but I wouldn't consider myself a cardiologist. That's too strong of a term. I like to go into burning buildings and help save children, but a firefighter, I don't like to associate with that." But those are exactly the kinds of things you hear with the word feminist. As history goes on, and the way that words change the way that we perceive them. Because feminism has been such a large movement, we've changed the way that we've thought about it, and the more that we interact with the word, the more that our perceptions change. Let's think about another word that history has changed for us. Gay. When you hear gay, do you think of merriment? Because that's actually where the word comes from. But no. A lot of people might say things like, "That's so gay," and that's highly offensive. It had turned from an adjective describing someone who's very merry all the time to someone who's homosexual to sometimes a derogatory term. But it all depends on the way it's used and the context it's used in. So it makes you think about, what words have we used that are going to continue to change? So let's think of some words that we have right now. "Hey, bae, your eyebrows look on fleek." That hamburger was on point. Just backstage, one of the people asked me what TBD was, and I thought that was very interesting. The words that we use now, can you imagine if someone found our diaries or our Facebook posts and was historically analyzing them? What could these words possibly mean? I feel like, yes, they would be interested to see what we're talking about, but the words that we use now very well could go into the dictionaries and be used commonly in the future. I guess we'll have to find out. So I have some, they're not real words, but you can probably assume what these stand for. How many of you guys think you know what those 2 things say? I would hope so. You certainly hear them a lot in. How many of you guys know what this is? It's a bit longer. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 letters. Okay. Well, let's bring it back to that, okay? How many of you guys can solve this math equation? No, I mean, it seems simple, but we don't know what x and y are, right? We need to define our variables. So if I told you that x was 2 and y was 3, you'd be like, piece of cake, I can do this. You're at Hopkins. So if I told you that the word a few slides previous, that, actually stood for Schmitz, that would mean nothing to you, right? But what if I told you that Schmitz was my swear word? I don't normally go out and use common swear words. I say Schmitz all the time. You would say I have a sailor's mouth because if I drop something, oh, Schmitz, we have a homework assignment due tomorrow, totally forgot about it. Schmitz. I say it all the time, but it doesn't offend anybody because only I know what I mean. Similar, when we have words, they don't actually have any value or meaning until we define that meaning and give it value. So you could go around saying all the swear words you wanted to, if only you knew what they were. And because we placed a value on commonly used cuss words, they've become cuss words. So now you can use this if you want to. So let's talk about one more, I guess, commonly used word, sick. When you hear sick, do you think about someone who is diseased, or cool, or gross? Because actually all three of these apply to sick. It's very confusing, I know. When I came to Hopkins, I was hearing words I'd never heard before. A lot of people, especially from New York, used to just end things with word. I don't know what that means, but it was explained to me that it just means, okay, cool. When people said sick, they also said ill, and that also just meant that you were a cool person. But you can't just apply that however you want. So theorems are things that are true, and they're proven to be true. There's a proof that goes along with them. But postulates can't be proven true, but they're assumed to be true. But you can't just go around making up your own theorems and postulates. I tried that, and it didn't work out so well for me. One of my good friends really likes to work out, and he's quite muscular now. So I saw him at the FFC, and for those of you who don't know what the FFC is, it's our cafeteria. For the longest time, I thought it was the Freshman 15 Center, but it's actually the Freshman Food Cafe. This is another example of how you can't just go making around things that you don't actually know what they mean. And those abbreviations stand for whatever you want them to. So anyways, we were at the FFC, and he just looked very muscular, and he'd just come back from working out, and I told him, wow, you look disgusting. Because he always says things like, oh, sick. He was very offended when I said that, and it turned into quite the rift. Because apparently, disgusting does not mean cool. It actually means you disgust me. So that just goes to show you that you can't just go around saying whatever you want. You need to carefully consider the context in which you're talking and whether or not other people are on the same page as you. That's the beautiful thing about math. When you have a math problem, it's very similar all over the world, right? But when you have different languages, they change. The culture changes when you go place to place. But math, it's a constant. But we have to be careful not to confuse that with our words, because those aren't constant. They're ever changing. So the next time that you talk about something, just take a step back and consider, what are you actually saying? The words that you say have a meaning now. They've changed from what it was in the past, and they will undoubtedly have an effect on your future. The next time you send out a tweet or a text or a Facebook post, think about what it would be like if someone else saw it. Are you really conveying your true feelings? Or are you just using the words that come most readily to you? If you think about all of those things, it's pretty clear. You don't need math to figure it out, but there's definite value to your words. And if we couldn't figure out how to describe our emotions and the way we feel and what we want to say correctly, that would put us at a loss I couldn't begin to describe.